New season, new me, and new pugging challenge. Patch 10.1, I have decided to join the furry gang. That's right, we are going to be bear tanking for this challenge, and because last time it wasn't hard enough, this time we are completing all dungeons at plus 20, pugging our way up to 2800 score. In the previous episode, we managed to complete our first plus 20, even though we almost completely trolled the key. That meant that we graduated out of the third bracket, and the only thing left for us to do now is to pug as many keys as possible and reach 2800 score. Now this last part of the challenge is obviously much harder than the rest, and it takes a lot of luck to be able to reach 2800 when you're pugging. It honestly feels like you're just rolling the dice a lot of the time, and it's just a gamble as to whether you're going to be able to time the key. You honestly have to assemble the Avengers a lot of the time and pull some really good players together to time those 21s and 22s to be able to reach 2800 score. Everyone, and I mean everyone in this bracket, needs to be pulling their weight. They need to use their utility, they need to use their defensives, they have to use their offensive cooldowns at the right time, and they have to match the cadence of the tank pulls. Everyone just has to be on the same page, and you have to get it going correctly to be able to time these keys. It's not the same as the earlier brackets where you can just fumble your way through them and potentially time the key even with 3 or 4 full wipes, lots and lots of deaths. Sometimes you can get away with a wipe here or there, but in general I would say that everyone has to be on the same page and you have to be playing pretty cleanly to time these 21s, 22s, 23s and reach this sort of score level. With that being said, we have a huge number of keys to get through here because we are starting around 2100 and we need to reach 2800 before the end of this episode. Let's get started then, shall we? We are going to try the 21 underrot that we got off the back of the 20 Halls of Infusion. We got incredibly lucky here to get a 21 underrot off the back of the Halls of Infusion. It was huge. It's a really, really nice key. It's by far the best key in my opinion, especially when pugging. It's just so much easier than the rest. The bosses are pretty lenient, the time is pretty lenient. Sure, there's some nasty trash in here, the bats are kind of annoying, but as long as you pull around them, you're going to be pretty much fine. Coming up to the Cragmore Arena with all the trash in it, we've played pretty much perfectly at this point, and I'm about to make my first mistake. So here I pull a Lasher, 2 of the Rots, I then get 1 of the Bats, and I want to pull this with 3 of the Lashes. Usually I want to do 3 Lashes plus 2 of the Living Rots into a Bat, so it's 6 mobs total, but I've got an extra Lasher here. The only thing we really have to watch out for is the fact we've got lots of Lashes, so you need to use your interrupts, your AoE stops. So I'm using Roar, I'm using knockbacks for example, just to make sure none of those casts are going off. And I run through a puddle on the floor, which I didn't realise had another swirly in it and instantly died, which is really, really bad. I was just trying to get back into the mobs there so they weren't running around too much, and I really just didn't see that swirly. Otherwise, the pull's going fine, we're not letting any casts go off. We're about to start losing a couple of people to the Bat. The best thing that you can do in Underrot with the Bats is to try and tank them in melee and then just pop a defensive. Use stuns as well, so if you've got a long stun, for instance the warrior could use Stormbolt for example, that really, really helps. The main idea though is honestly just to use your priority damage into the Bats, kill them off early, and that will help this area go much, much smoother. The rest of the dungeon went pretty well. We had quite a few extra deaths, but they were just random deaths really. We did lose some people to 2 Shadow Bolt volleys going off from Defilers. We also lost some people to bosses, so I think 1 on Spore Caller, 1 on Cragmore, but there was no full wipes and everything went pretty fine, nothing much that we could have done about it. And then we end up at last boss with about 5.5 minutes to spare, which is a long time. We could probably even wipe right now, get back to the boss and still time this key. But in all honesty, on Tyrannical Weeks, this boss is a bit of a pug killer. It can be a wipe fest, and it's because of this overlap right now. You can see here the Titan Keeper is going off to kill some blood spawns, and that means that he is not casting the Cleansing Light and people are at high stacks of the dot. The AoE damage is then going out from the frontal. You can't avoid a portion of it. Obviously, you don't want to stand in it, but you still get hit with some damage fairly frequently, and that means that there's a big, big spike there, and you need to use defensives on those overlaps. So when the bloods spawn, you need to watch out, and if you have high stacks of the magic dot, that is when you press defensives. That is by far the most important thing to do on this fight. So we have lost 2 people so far, and we have used a combat res, leaving us with no combat reses. That means that we have no room for error here, and unfortunately, you'll see in a second, the healer is about to get clapped by a vile expulsion. This is going to leave me and 2 DPS left, and I'm going to have to sustain myself to try and kill off the boss. Thankfully, the boss is already pretty low, and honestly, as bear tank, I have a lot of self-sustain. I'm not that reliant on healers. Most of the time, I can heal myself completely free, so we are going to be able to keep ourselves alive. It's just a question of whether we have the time left to kill the boss. Thankfully, this warrior is an absolute god gamer and is going to self-sustain for the remainder of this fight, which is kind of crazy. I didn't realize how much self-sustain Fury really had. Seeing them keep themselves alive on a 21 underrot with things like incorporeal going off as well is kind of crazy. They did really well here at self-sustain, and because the warrior did such a good job in keeping themselves alive, that meant that we had more than enough DPS and the timer was not that tight in the end. I think if it was just me, I probably wouldn't have been able to meet the DPS check here. I might have been able to, but it would have been really close. So a huge shout out to Officer Tobe, the Fury Warrior, for saving this key and getting us the Underrot portal and helping us on our way. The next key that we got then was a 22 Vortex Pinnacle, which is a really nasty key, especially on Tyrannical weeks. I didn't feel that comfortable in attempting a plus 22 Vortex Pinnacle with 429 item level, so because of that we went to go and craft a new headpiece with a toxified armor patch to complement our boots. After just a few recrafts, we managed to fish for the 447 item level headpiece, which was a massive upgrade. This piece by itself was 3 item levels to our overall item level, and it gave us the epic achievement which we have reached finally after we have timed our first plus 20. Like I mentioned before, Vortex Pinnacle is incredibly deadly on a Tyrannical week. It feels like every boss in here, all 3 of them, have the absolute potential to wipe you and could just be a wipe fest in any pug that you create. Now we breezed through this key. Look at this, we have 1 death left and we have 5 minutes to kill the last boss. The last boss though is a brick wall in this key. These Skyfall Novas which spawn just do so much damage, and they have a lot of HP which you need to chew through to reduce the incoming damage. Now there are many overlaps in here which are incredibly difficult. The first is the Skyfall Nova plus Static Cling combo. People are panicking because there's damage going out and then they're not jumping at the correct time, and here we accidentally lose the healer. It's okay though, we have 3 combat reses so we can make quite a few mistakes and still time this key. The next really nasty overlap is when the Skyfall Novas are out and we also have Chain Lightning being cast. You can see here we have a Skyfall Nova and the priest is getting targeted by Chain Lightning. That overlap you need heavy cooldowns for, and if you're completely tapped and you've been targeted poorly by Chain Lightnings, you need to use things like health potions there to keep yourself healthy. Now that is 1 more combat res used. We still have 1 combat res left, but we have 60% of the boss's HP to chew through. The one thing that is very frustrating about this fight is you cannot lose a DPS. If you lose a DPS, that means you're not going to be able to kill the Skyfall Novas in time, and you're not going to be able to kill the boss. It's not a Halls of Infusion 3rd boss, for example, where you can realistically lose a player and still be fine. There are tight DPS checks here which you have to meet. And this is a great demonstration of we just don't have the damage here to kill this star, and unfortunately the healer dies, and at this point the key is over. We have absolutely no way of rezzing anyone. We've used 3 combat reses and there is no way that the remaining players can kill this. We just do not have enough DPS or sustain to be able to kill the boss. This was a really unfortunate way for our final key to end. We played the key perfectly up until last boss where it all falls apart. Now I wasn't too disappointed at the time. I was more than happy to run the 21 key back because in reality, a 22 Vortex on a tyrannical week was never in my plan before reaching 2800. Who would have guessed it? We ended up in exactly the same scenario in the 21 Vortex. We got to last boss with about 6 minutes to spare. We had 5 deaths, which was slightly more than the first key. However, they were all just random deaths again, not much that we personally could have done about it. And we get to last boss, we have more than enough time to kill this, we just have to take our time, use our defensives correctly, and we'll be fine. But the same overlaps end up killing us. We end up dying to those Chain Lightning Skyfall Nova overlaps, and it's just a real crunch point where you have to use your defensives correctly. That Chain Lightning that just hit the healer without any other damage going out did roughly 75% of their HP pool. That means if there's any other damage going out, such as these Novas, you absolutely need a defensive to push through it. Here we might have been able to kill the star sooner. If we killed the star sooner, we might not have had this overlap, but that overlap there between the Chain Lightning and the Nova is what we're talking about, and it's that which just consistently kills us. We end up full wiping twice, but the third time which we come back to the boss, everyone's using the defensives correctly, everyone's on point, and we do manage to kill it. Thankfully, everyone stuck around. I did ask, I said if we could just try and complete it because I didn't want a 20 Vortex Pinnacle, so everyone stuck around to kill it here, which was massive. That was very nice of them. They absolutely didn't have to stick around, so I do appreciate that when a group sticks together and finally manages to beat the boss which they've been stuck on. We didn't get any loot, and the key which we got, unfortunately, was a plus 20 Halls of Infusion. Now, I didn't want to run Halls of Infusion back because we already had a plus 20 timed. So that meant that we could only go and pug other people's keys, and because of our score, I wasn't able to really get into groups other than plus 18s and 19s. We ended up timing a plus 19 Freehold, a plus 19 Neltharian's Lair, a plus 18 Neltharus, a plus 18 Brackenhide, and then we out of timed a plus 19 Alderman. At the end of the week then, we were coming up on 2500 score and we were 232 item level. On to what could potentially be our final week then, and we know what we start with on a new week. It is a vault. We end up getting a chest or braces potentially here. The chest piece is a plus 6 item level upgrade. The wrists we already have, but we have them at a lower item level. So for me, when I looked at this, I immediately thought, well, I may as well take the chest piece because that's going to be a plus 6 item level upgrade, and we will be eventually upgrading these same wrists that we have to 441, so it will only be a 3 item level upgrade towards the end of this week. It's not the best vault, it's okay. It would have been nice to see rings or trinkets or other pieces with nice stats on them, but we'll take it. 6 item levels we can't complain at. The key that we get though is much nicer. We get a plus 21 at Neltharian's Lair, which is a great start. On Fortifying specifically, as long as you can deal with the pelters, you're probably going to be fine, and there's quite a lot of leeway in the key where you can even make mistakes and still time it. As we're getting into this key, I want to say I went full on degenerate this week. I knew that I could complete the challenge in this week, so I really wanted to push on and try and get as much score as I could. This led us to attempting over 25 keys in a single week, which I almost never do. I played more WoW this week than I ever have, and I absolutely loved it. This challenge was awesome, and getting on and playing a new tank and a new experience was incredibly fun, and I highly recommend it to everyone else. Just go and play new ults. It's one of the funnest experiences in WoW in my opinion. You get to try a completely new role. You see dungeons from a completely different perspective. It is incredibly rewarding. Back to the challenge though. Because we did so many keys in this week, we're going to have to speedrun a few of these to get towards the end of the challenge. For this 21 lair then, you guessed it, we ended up wiping to Naraxis after we enraged the boss. We then immediately ran it back into another 21 lair because one of the players, the Demon Hunter, had the key and wanted to go again. Now, when we ran the key back, we didn't play it that well. This is one of the biggest mistakes. We let one of the grubs get their cast off, which spawns a grabber, and this just full wipes you whenever the cast goes through. But this still wasn't enough to deplete the key. We had so many deaths towards the end of this dungeon, but like I said, it doesn't matter really because the timer is so free in Neltharian's Lair. Even with those 23 deaths, we still timed the key with 2 minutes left, which is a huge amount of margin. We did get some loot, but it isn't that great because we don't like crit. However, what we did get is we re-rolled into a plus 20 Underrot, which is a very nice key to see. And even better than that, we two-chested the Underrot, which left us with a plus 22 Neltharian's Lair to try and redeem ourselves. We did not redeem ourselves. We ended up wiping to the first boss, Rockmora. The main reason why we wiped was because of the ads. You can see we are absolutely blasting the boss right now. And the main issue is that people are just not swapping over to the skitter ads. So you'll see in a second, we're about to let a shatter go through and we have 2 ads up. We kill off one of them, but one's going to be left remaining. And because there's 1 ad left alive, we end up dying here. What is really, really frustrating is that I can see others just slamming damage into the boss. And the issue with it is if you just continue hitting the boss and you don't swap to the ads, then all that happens is more ads spawn and it becomes even harder to kill the ads off because you've spawned more ads. It's like a catch-22. If you don't hard swap to them and fully focus them, you're almost always going to be left with 1 alive. And it's going to be really, really hard to get back on top of the ads and make sure you don't have any when the Shattercast goes out. We then ran it back again. We came up to the last boss with 20-ish deaths, which is just crazy. And we still timed the key with 2 minutes to spare. We ended up getting a 22 freehold, which I was super excited to see. That's a decent key on a fortified week. As long as I can tank the mobs, this is potentially the first 22 that we could time. The big issue with freehold is you have to do quite a few double and triple pulls to stay ahead of the timer at this sort of key level, and then this first boss. In fact, all bosses have things that you can die to. So the shaman got caught out, anked, and then the rep paladin died to the shoot mechanic. This shoots are honestly crazy from this boss. It's kind of ridiculous that you can lose more than 50% of your HP to a shoot attack, which there's no timer for. You can't see who's going to get hit. And then if you get 2 in a row, you just die. The mage then flops here as well, which is just ridiculous. It's nothing to do with how the mage is playing, it's just ridiculous boss design. I can't believe that 2 of these shoots can just kill people, it's kind of crazy. We do phase the boss, but we've already used a CR. The mage is dead. We're going to be behind because we can't res them, so the time is just going to be much, much tighter now. And then the cherry on top here, we are actually going to lose the hunter to another incredibly dangerous combo, and that is the Azerite powder shot into some poop, which just immediately kills him. We end up running the key back then into a 21 freehold, and this goes much, much better. We do have 13 deaths, but most of those came around Trothak and the trash there. Those little fixate ads really do love to just randomly snipe people. But even with 13 deaths again, we're still going to be okay, and it's going to be possible to time this 21 freehold, which just goes to show if you're doing those double and triple pulls, which I was talking about earlier, you get enough leeway in this key to buy yourself some time and a few mistakes. The next key that we get then is a 22 Underrot, which is an awesome key. I am very, very confident right now that we will be able to time our first 22 key. The confidence, however, is pretty short-lived. Looking back on this, I genuinely don't know how I kept it together. Just bouncing up or down in this 21-22 range is incredibly painful. It really feels like we could have maybe done 23s and 24s in this challenge if we didn't have such bad luck in this streak. That's pugging for you though. There's not much that you can do about it. You just have to ride that roller coaster and those ups and downs, and you have to push through those depletes to get that juicy, juicy score. Now this is where it all starts to go wrong. We have a maggot that's casting away from the group, at least I think it is. Unfortunately though, the warlock gets caught out. I could have used my knock there to stop that, and I definitely should have done, so that's 1 death. We then get the healer being focused down by the bat, which is just taking huge damage right now, so I'm charging over to try and kill it off. The warrior is doing the same, he's following the bat, but unfortunately dies to a green swirly on the floor. We then also immediately lose the druid to another green swirly, and at this point it is me and my healer, and we are 2-manning the remainder of this pack. The warlock then returns and we finally have some DPS left, but unfortunately the warlock is getting focused down by the bat. Because the bat is on him, he then panics, runs off towards the side and accidentally butt pulls the lashes and decides to just immediately leave. Now, looking back at this, it was hilarious what an absolute fiesta those few pulls were. But that warlock completely and utterly tilted me. This key was still fine. We could have timed it even with a full wipe here. We would have been okay. But I guess he just couldn't deal with it and had to troll someone else's key. We ended up depleting the 21 as well, but I unfortunately didn't record it. But the 20 went much better. This group was really solid. I think if we'd had this group even in the 21, we would have been absolutely fine and been able to time it. But anyway, we timed this with about 4 minutes to spare, which is a lot of extra time, and we ended up with a plus 21 Brackenhide Hollow. Brackenhide is typically a really nice key, but it can go wrong, and it was going wrong here. We ended up just dying to lots of random casts, people flopping, mobs then taking too long to die, at which point then I would die. And we had, I think it was 2 full wipes at this point, and then maybe 8 other random deaths. So we were in a really bad spot. We probably wouldn't have been able to time this key unless everything went perfectly from now on in. But then, unfortunately, the healer also DCs, at which point we decided to call it. No. Anyway, the Brackenhide plus 20 went significantly better until this moment here where I get baited into doing something incredibly stupid. I'm pulling these 2 mobs towards this corner because you can line of sight them and help move the mobs together. Top tip whenever you're in your pugs. But the healer lusts and I get baited into thinking that means we should pull the boss. You should absolutely not pull the boss with this trash, especially in a pug group. The extra withering contagion plus then the damage coming up from the caster at the back, it's a no-go. You absolutely do not want to do this. Everything just goes wrong very, very quickly. Like I said, the additional damage going out and the distractions from killing off the totem just means that we're not going to do well here. The totem is starting to cast. We're even going to let the totem cast multiple times because people can't get to the totem because they have the withering contagion debuff. We're then just going to start losing people. Thankfully though, because we have done so many aggressive pulls and we've saved so much time up to this point, we're actually going to be able to full wipe, run it all the way back and still kill the boss on time and get ourselves a new 21 key. Second time around, everyone does their job perfectly and we get ourselves the Brackenhide Hollow Portal, which is awesome. Unfortunately though, we end up with a Neltharus key, which is by far one of the worst, especially when you're pugging. We end up wiping to one of the Thaumaturge casts going off. We then wipe to Incorporeal. We then butt pull the worst mob of the dungeon, the Commander. And then we chain wipe on last boss. Thankfully though, everyone stuck around to kill the boss and make sure we complete the key. I did not want to end up with a 20 Neltharus, potentially deplete that and then back down at a 19. That would have been awful. So I was super thankful that everyone stuck around and we actually completed this. It could have been really, really bad if we didn't. The next key that we got was a plus 20 older man, which again is a rough key, but personally I think this is slightly better. Again, similar to Freehold, you can do lots of 2 and 3 pack pulls to help save you some time and give you that little bit of leeway. The older man went super well. We ended up timing this key with about 2.5 minutes to spare. Again, the closest that we got to a wipe was on the 4th boss, Emberon. We ended up unfortunately losing 2 people to the Searing Clap plus Embers overlap. That's where you need to pump defensives to make sure you're going to survive. But we didn't, and unfortunately we lost a couple of people. We had CRs though, so we managed to get through it. But otherwise the key went super, super well. We did get some loot, but it's of no real use to us because it's got a crit on it. The key, however, that we got was a plus 21 Halls of Infusion, which is where our luck starts to change and we go on a complete and utter rampage from this point onwards. We ended up getting the God comp together. We have Shadow Priest, Rogue and Mage here. All 3 of these specs are insanely good. The Mage is Arcane, but honestly, I don't mind that. Arcane does such good prio damage and single target damage on bosses that it can be insanely useful to just send everything and burn a boss in sub 2 minutes because you've got so much burst damage. The rest of the comp can make up AoE, so the Shadow Priest and the Rogue, and we can just make sure that we have enough overall damage to do these keys well. As soon as we start this key, there's one thing that I notice, and that is everyone is using all of their utility. This is such a good team right now. If you go back and watch that, you can see that everyone other than the Mage uses their kick, and then we use AoE stops to make sure no one gets a cast off. That is insanely good. You very, very rarely see everyone using their AoE stops and their kicks in the first pack. Honestly, every other dungeon that we've been in, it's mostly me carrying the kicks and stops. And in this dungeon specifically, I was very surprised and I immediately knew that we had some good players. We ended up getting to Khajiit with only 3 deaths, and those 3 deaths were just random deaths again. Not much that we could do about it. And we are massively ahead of the timer. If you see right now, this Shadow Priest has been destroying the damage meters, absolutely showing why Shadow Priest is king right now. We're speeding through this boss, but I'm going through it at a fast pace because I just want to show you what my mindset was like. At the time when we got to this boss, I said to myself, if we play this cleanly, I'm going to try and have a bit of banter with these players and see if they want to stick around and do a few more keys to get me that last 100 score and reach 2800. And you can see here, this fight went perfectly. The damage was insane, everyone was doing exactly what they needed to, and I immediately start having a bit of banter with them, trying to set them up for the next key.
This is banter. It really is. It really is.
So we end up almost two-chesting a 21 Halls of Infusion, which is pretty hard to do. The healer heals, the DPS do DPS, everyone's using their defensives, everyone's using their utility, and I immediately know that I want to keep playing with them, so I just ask if they want to do any more. We have a 22 Older Man, which is a hard key, but let's go and see how it goes with this new group. Now this is one of the best things that you can do, and it's honestly my top tip every single time. It's to play your own key, and it's to add players and play with players that you think are good. If you vibe with players, they're using their utility, they're using the defensives, everything's going well, just add them and keep playing with them. Now I didn't add them to my friends list here, but I kept playing with them because I knew that if we just did the next 4 or 5 dungeons together, we're probably going to time everything and we're going to do pretty well out of it and gain a lot of score here. But genuinely, if I wasn't on a challenge, I would actually play with these players again because they were stand-up players and they had good crack and it was fun to play with them. So why not do that as well? When you're playing Mythic Plus, just add those players that you vibe with, try and get a group together and play with the same players consistently, because honestly it makes such a difference to your Mythic Plus experience. I do these challenges because they are kind of fun, but honestly pugging is significantly worse than just playing with a consistent group and having fun with players that you know are good. Now, having just said how well it's going and how good everything's going, I then make a terrible mistake. After the third boss, I have just pulled a triple pull here. I had all my cooldowns up, I felt confident that I'd be able to tank this. We've done pretty well, but mobs are about to start dying and I panic with Sanguine, and I'm going to start running backwards here. But I am hyper aware that there is another pack just behind me that I really don't want to pull. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of zigzag my way backwards, and that just does not leave me enough space. I should have completely changed direction and tried to run back towards the boss room. You can see in a second I'm going to try and run around this lantern, but I just turned my back and died to the mobs. I really should have just slow pulled this towards the boss room and everything would have been fine, but unfortunately I caused a full wipe. Because I played badly there and caused a full wipe, we end up having to start doing a lot of really big pulls, which I didn't want to do. Here we're going to pull 2 Time Reavers, and it's a really long pull to try and get all these Time Reavers together with 3 agents. This is incredibly deadly. I would not normally do this, but because the timer was so tight, this is what we end up having to do, and this unfortunately is going to cause another wipe. This was the only way we might have been able to time the key, so that's why I did it. Like I said, under normal circumstances, I absolutely would not do this pull. So with all of that considered and the fact that I end up having to do some bad pulls which we wouldn't normally do, we're only 3 minutes over the timer, and that's with 2 full wipes and then also some other mistakes with me. You can see here there's 66 million of Sanguine. Again, that was due to my tanking. If we'd played this differently, we absolutely could have timed this key with this group. So I'm still keen on sticking around and playing with them because I'd really like to keep playing with a consistent group like this. If I cover up my mistakes, then we're going to be able to get some more score. I know we will. So we end up doing someone else's key here because I get a 21 Halls. We end up doing a 21 Neltharian's Lair, which we've already timed. And this lair, again, goes incredibly smoothly. Look at this, 3 deaths. And we are going to 2 chest a 21 Nelths, which is insane. Really strong play out of everyone. And that means that we end up with a 23 key. We end up with a 23 Neltharus, which is a ridiculously hard key to time. We end up immediately depleting the 23, but let's go and have a look at how the 22 goes. So for a 22 Neltharus, I know we have to pull out some big boy pants and do some big boy strats. So here we have a good strat for you, and that is in Neltharus as a tank. You can go right first, use chains, and then come back to Magma Tusk. Now you have to be in a very coordinated group. Everyone needs to use chains correctly, but it's well worthwhile doing it because you can get the chains on cooldown and then come back and use more later. So if you see here, we're going to pull all the way up to Lahar, the mini boss, and pull all of this trash onto this first set of chains. and then everyone's going to use them, and we are going to immediately melt this pack, which is incredibly good for the timer because, like I said, it means that the chain timer is ticking down whilst we're doing Magma Tusk, and then we can come back and use 5 chains again, which is just super good and very efficient for the overall timer. Now the next set of chains that we're about to do doesn't go quite as well. This clip here is after Magma Tusk, so we've gone and done Magma Tusk, we then come back and now we have chains off cooldown again. I wanted to use 2 here to kill off this pack, and then we were going to use 3 chains on the next pack. Unfortunately, we used 3 chains there. It doesn't really matter, we still got 2 chains left. This is going to be another big pull, so this is going to be everything from Lahar sort of down, so I think in total it's about 10 mobs that we pull, and then I want to use the chains. Unfortunately though, the healer takes aggro and dies here. For a moment the healer was topping the damage meters, so he was trying to get a bit of damage in there, which, you know, you want to do, but I wasn't really doing damage myself. I was just trying to group mobs up. We then used 2 chains of combat res to get the healer back up, and we've sort of stabilized, but unfortunately because there are still so many mobs alive, and specifically because we have 2 hunters which really do a lot of damage, we're going to really struggle here. People start dropping again. I managed to survive though, so I keep the pack alive at half HP and then we do kill it, but obviously we've added quite a lot of time onto the timer here with this many deaths. In the end, it didn't really matter though, because we bought ourselves enough time with all of those cool chain plays to still have 11 deaths and time a 22 Nelthorus, which is just insane. This is one of the hardest keys to do in my opinion, and for it to be the first 22 which we actually time is incredibly good, and just goes to show again how good this comp really is. We ended up getting a 23 Alderman off this key, which means that we get a chance to redeem ourselves and potentially time this Alderman. We do end up dropping it down from a 23 to a 22 because we don't think we're going to be able to do the 23. In hindsight, I wish we just attempted it, but it doesn't really matter. We get to give the Alderman another go and potentially employ some new strats. So after Talondrus, the time where it all went wrong, I actually did a completely different pull. This time I pulled everything back to give us more space and allow us to do 2 double pulls instead of a triple pull into a single pull. This pull in general is just much safer in my opinion. As long as everyone is line of sighting here and no one's taking damage from those hail of stones, it just means that you have much more space. You get to group everything up, and then you can just slowly walk back to the boss room, allowing you to avoid that sanguine. So you'll see here everything's about to start dying, and we're just going to book it to the left, and we are going to allow the sanguine to drop, but then we pull the mobs out of it and we move away from the other packs. Not only is this significantly safer in my opinion, but also you'll see at the end of this we only end up with a couple of million of sanguine healing rather than over 6 million from a single pull, which is obviously much worse. The rest of the dungeon went pretty well. We only had 2 or 3 deaths beyond this point, and that means that we ended up at the last boss with enough time left that we didn't have to do any of those crazy pulls that we were attempting before. Now the timer is pretty tight here, but we do end up timing it, and we end up smashing a 22 Alderman, which I genuinely think is the second hardest key behind Nelthorus. So the first 2 22s that we have in fact timed are in Nelthorus into an Alderman. That shows that we can get everything else done at a plus 22. Now we are getting incredibly close here. There's probably only a couple of keys left that we need to do, and thankfully one of them is a Bracken Hide, and we get a plus 23 Bracken Hide out of this key. As I've mentioned before in this video, I really like Bracken Hide specifically as a DPS player, but there are so many big pulls, it is awesome. Unfortunately though, that means because I like to pull big, sometimes I can't tank it and I accidentally flopped over, so we ended up just running back the 22 pretty much immediately after the first few pulls, and I tone it back a little bit and I do some slightly smaller pulls here. That doesn't mean that we're doing small pulls, we're just doing slightly smaller pulls. You can see here, we instantly get procced as soon as we walk in, and we're doing a triple pull on the first pull. We end up playing the dungeon pretty clean though. Honestly, the worst area is this first area, and we end up losing a few players to these Earth Bolt spams. Every time that we had 2 mystics and then we also had a totem going off, we pretty much lost 2 players. So we lost quite a few players in this first area, but after this first area, everything started clicking and we played really cleanly. After tree mouth, this is a pretty good tip. What you want to try and do is avoid stink breath at all costs. You can see here, I've just asked the group to shroud plus mind soothe, and then I'm going to pull the boss just to be extra safe, and then they'll be able to run around, and I can just sacrifice myself for the greater good. Anyway, the rest of the dungeon went pretty well. We ended up having a couple of other random deaths again. Here we do butt pull, and we're about to lose some more players. But we have more than enough time to get to the last boss again because we've been pretty aggressive with the pulls that we did earlier. It gets very close at the end here. We have about 30 seconds left as the boss is about to die. So it took a little bit of luck. It has been pretty close on a couple of these keys, but we do manage to time it in the end, and that brings us ever so close to completing our challenge. We end up only 16 score away from 2.8k, which means we only have to do a +20 Vortex Pinnacle and we will have completed the challenge. Having done, I think, an additional 3 keys, that's right, a Neltharis, an Alderman and a Brackenhide, beyond the first key that we did together, we ended up going our separate ways. We had to go for food, real life got in the way. So that means for the last key, we jumped into the Pug world again and we pugged someone else's +21 Vortex. Now this key didn't go quite as well as the other ones, but that was mostly due to my fault. There's a couple of things which we do wrong here. The first thing that we do wrong is this double pull. There's no need to do this double pull in a 21 Pug. We have 2 Vortexes and a Soldier here. The Vortex is spam cast, and then they have Cyclones which you want to interrupt pretty much everything. And then the Soldiers do a really nasty Magic Dot, which if you have 3 of them going out is obviously going to be doing a lot of group-wide damage. The combination of having 3 Soldiers and 3 Vortexes is just too much, especially on a fortified week. You have to be very coordinated here in my opinion, probably with everyone on comms to coordinate kicks and make sure that people aren't getting chunked by these wind bolts. The next thing that we do wrong is that we run straight into a pack of stars. We only had another 2 or 3 deaths after that point. The first wipe that we had, we ended up having 6 deaths on it. And then we run into these stars, and you can see in a second, the hunter lands and just immediately dies. I should have really just jumped down, let everyone get topped, and then kill off the stars. That would have been much better in my opinion. We end up losing 5 seconds here to the death. We then have to stand, and we're using revive. We didn't have the hunter there doing damage, so it just took longer, and we have 2 minutes and 20 seconds left to kill this boss. We do have Lust coming up about a minute in, so with Lust, hopefully we have enough time to kill this boss, but it is going to be really close. Everyone is using their defensives at the correct time. We are living the Skyfall Nova and the Chain Lightning combinations, and everything looks to be going pretty well. We get Lust up, and we're about to use Lust with cooldowns here, and that leaves us with about 30 seconds left to do 30% of the boss's HP. Under normal circumstances, this is absolutely not enough time, but because we're in Lust and everyone has cooldowns, we might just be able to do this. The one thing that we probably need to do though is we need to skip the next Skyfall Nova. We should just heal through it, try and use defensive CDs, but I stupidly run the boss over. There was no reason for me to do this. I absolutely should not have done it in my opinion. Looking back at this now, we absolutely could have just killed the boss and left the Skyfall Nova and probably been fine. If you can see here, most people are actually focusing on the boss and we're letting the Skyfall Nova go, but we still kill it. And unfortunately, we overtime the key by 5 seconds, but it doesn't matter. We still get the score that we need to reach 2800. Even though that was a bit of an anticlimactic way to end the challenge, we still did it, and I am super happy with our progression. It roughly took us 4 weeks and 4 days playtime, although a lot of that playtime I was AFK. It's probably something more like 2/3 of that. Let's call it 3 days. So 3 days playtime over 4 weeks to get here, and I was super happy with the progress. So at the end of the challenge then, we obviously had a 2800 score, but we also had 440 item level, which just goes to show how fast you can gear up characters on the current patch as well. I'd highly advise this to anyone else. Just jump in and start playing alts because it really is so good right now. Anyway, as we come to the end of one challenge, we are going to be planning for the next one, and the next one's going to be a big one. We'll be doing it in the next major tier, so 10.2, and I want to know from all of you lovely ladies and gentlemen what you would like me me to play. I am going to be putting up community polls about the role, so whether you want me to play tank, healer or DPS, and then depending on the role we will release another poll. If it's a DPS poll, I will be choosing only C tier or below specs for you to choose from, and if it's tank or healer, then all of the specs will be available to vote on. And then I'm also going to be voting over on my Discord about the rule set for the next challenge, because there was so many issues with my first video and how many people came out of the woodwork to tell me that I'm a casual and that this challenge isn't a challenge. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let people vote on the challenge itself and see what rules we can come up with. You could realistically vote for me to only pug other people's keys, which I think would make this challenge significantly harder, and in reality might make it so it takes 8+ weeks for me to be able to complete, because I'm going to have to do so many keys. So if you've got a vindictive side and you want to come and punish me and give me some really bad rules, then head on over to my Discord. I will be doing an announcement when those rules go up. And as always, if you want anything from my UI, you can head on over to my Twitch. I've got everything linked up there for free. Just use the !UI command in chat and you will get a Word document with everything in there. I also stream all of my push keys and we do viewer keys as well. So if you want to come and play along with me, then feel free to do so. And I would also like to give a huge shout out to my few patrons. As I always say, you guys mean so much to me. Incoming content creation is incredibly inconsistent. There are peaks and troughs in viewership, and Patreon members make a massive difference in giving me some form of consistent income. So I really appreciate you guys and what you do for me. A huge thanks as always. If you would also like to potentially support me beyond a thumbs up and a subscribe, then you could head on over to my Patreon and see what I have to offer. There are a few things that I do offer in return. And as always, hopefully you have enjoyed this one. If you have done, we will see you guys in the next one. Peace.